That's a good disagreement here for us. Always interesting to see. Let's roll into Ron Holland here. Can we start with the bio stuff, please?
We absolutely can. And so Ron Holland is a player who's been on, basketball people's radar for a little while now. And so he grew up in Texas, consensus 5-star recruit, number 2 on ESPN, number 8 in Rivals, played in the 23 Hoop Summit, which you attended, and all the bigger high school showcases, but chose the G League Ignite over major college programs after originally committing to Texas. He played for the U.S. in some of the youth stuff, FIBA Under 17 World Cup, FIBA Under 16 America's Championship. And Holland, part of the intrigue with him is the physical measurements. 6'6.5" without shoes, 197 pounds with a 6'10" and 3/4 wingspan and an 8'8" standing reach. He was born in July of 2005, so his rookie year will be his age 19 season. He is one of the younger players in this draft, not the youngest, but one of the younger players.
Yeah, and that July birthday, I think that does matter, and I think he has shown a lot of evolution over the last year or so. As we'll see, I mean, 30% usage in the G League was not something I would have thought. And I talked about him some with Keandre today, so I'll try not to be too redundant there. Let's start with his physical profile. What did you make of that, Danny? You mentioned the numbers. That's kind of like, not quite Jaylen Brown, absolute prototypical small forward size, but certainly decent enough to be a small forward.
Yeah, it's decent enough if you want to take the basic measurables that's in line with Andre Robertson is going back a while, but that's actually the closest physical one that I was able to kind of dig up. Julian Strother's not too far off that. BJ Boston isn't too far off that. So not pure threes, but getting there close. And I would describe Holland. Do you want to go into athleticism now, or do you want to go into
Yeah, well, one thing that was kind of interesting to me, I was surprised that he's listed only at 194. He looks bigger than that. He plays stronger than that. I would say again though, that's kind of your prototypical small forward size is probably 220. So again, he's a little bit small. I would say size wise, maybe he looks a little bit more like kind of like an RJ Barrett out there. He's got a little longer arms. I'd say more explosive than him. And then yeah, in terms of the athleticism, what did you make of that?
So I thought he was more finesse than power, but it's interesting. We just talked about the Rockets. I thinking back to other perimeter players who played for the Ignite. I thought of him as like a level below Jalen Green athletically, and that's a high bar. Jalen
Oh,
Green,
sure. Yeah, I mean, Jalen Green is, was
ridiculous.
he still is absolutely
Yeah.
ridiculous.
And like there are plays where Holland just beats everyone down the floor after a mid basket, and he has enough vertical pop to do what you need. And of course the block numbers on him are very good. We'll of course talk about that later. But so I would say very good, not elite. Like, for example, like not a Thompson twin or anything like that, but totally credible for the perimeter in the NBA.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider him like a dunk contest athlete, but yeah, certainly I would say an above average one. Um, Maybe a little bit better off of 1 foot than two. And it has a pretty good Euro step game, can still explode off of that. I think the thing that stood out the most to me is just he looks very good moving in a straight line, and he also really likes to do it.
Yeah.
Like he really will just run the floor really hard on either end. When he gets the ball in any sort of transition, he's just going to keep going until you like really get in front of him and stop him. That's something that really stood out to me at the Hoop Summit as well last year, is that he just was like relentless. Just would keep going at you, and like it doesn't, at least back then, it didn't look just like so unstoppable. And then you look up and he's got like 8 fast break buckets in the game. He also likes to use that speed to recover loose balls, get out into passing lanes as well. But yeah, and then I talked about this with Keandre. I don't know that his like straight up side to side movement is amazing, where he's just like absolutely stoning guys with his chest who are trying to drive on him. But I do think that he's able to do like the cross step, which you called it, where if you are beaten a little bit, you cross one leg over the other, start to run alongside the guy. He's very solid at that. I thought he had decent decel when he's in transition also. And off of 2 feet, he could get up for an alley-oop maybe. It wasn't wasn't like unbelievable. Again, like you weren't just like wowed by it, but you're like, yeah, if he gets downhill, he's gonna attack, he's gonna dunk, he can finish left hand, right hand, better going right, like most guys his age. So yeah, I think like very solid athlete. I think I wouldn't say that he was as much finesse maybe as you. Maybe that was
Well,
kind of based on seeing him in person a year ago as well.
well,
That
and
I
it,
thought that kind
it
of stood
also
out
ties
more.
in with an interesting, like I guess we'll call it a difference of opinion, where you talked about how you thought he was a little heavier. For me, the way that I noticed that Holland was lighter was the way that he finished and the finishes that I liked. So Holland, the finishes that looked better for me were not the finishes through contact, it was the finishes around contact. And generally speaking, that's the purview of smaller guys. Like the idea is that, bigger guys, it's you bounce off of them or you do something else. And with Holland, and you're playing in the G League where rim protection, remember, is not the best. That is a flaw of the G League that we've grown to appreciate over the last couple of years, Scoot Henderson and others like that you kind of want to price it a little bit differently. And so for me, when I watched the film, like, oh, the plays where Holland was trying to get up through a dude, those shots looked a little bit dicey, but it was where he like kind of used his length, used the space. That stuff looked a little bit better. And for point of reference there, 53% on layups, 222 attempts total, and he only missed 4 of his 48 dunks. I'm pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I guess to finish up on some of the finishing, and then maybe we can get into the stats a little bit more after that. But I thought, the numbers weren't like unbelievable finishing. I mean, that's one of the things that does generally get better. I didn't think he was like missing shots at the rim because he was getting overwhelmed physically or just couldn't get the separation. Some of it he would get, I mean, some of it was just he had like such a crazy high usage rate and just wasn't able to get all the way to the basket. He would just kind of get stuck. There wasn't really anyone open. His floater numbers were pretty bad there too, because a lot of times he would just drive and kind of get stuck and have to force something up that just, yeah, I think actually kind of the same way that we'd seen from like Miles Bridges in the this year, where there just wasn't that much there and he just had to kind of throw it up and wasn't necessarily a good shot. I don't think that's something that he's going to have to do a ton of. I think his floater will be like good enough, if not necessarily something he's going to rely on. And then, but when he did get to the basket, I thought like he was getting pretty decent angles. He had some decent ideas. It wasn't just these no hope finishes. It just he didn't quite have the touch, but it wasn't like he's slamming these off the backboard either. It was just like, all right, it seemed to me like, yeah, a few more years of practice. These are like decent looking layups. Like I think these will just start to go in for him more. Was kind of the way I looked at it with some of his finishing trouble. And I didn't even think his finishing was like that bad to begin with.
Not as bad as some other guys that we've watched in recent vintage for sure.
Yeah, what are some of the big stats that stick out for him?
Is that when we talk about the jump shot, or are you looking more for big picture?
No, whatever you want.
The jump shot. I mean, that is to me
Yeah.
the Ron Holland story. And so I got kind of obsessed with this because it was the first thing that I noticed was like, because remember, I haven't seen him in person. I didn't get to go to last year's Hoop Summit. And I just the like all caps ROUGH rough for me with the jump shot with him. And so Holland, 24% on 3.3 per game. That's 96 threes during his G League Ignite season. And so I went back because I was interested enough in this. And Holland shot 29% on 93s his senior year of high school and 30% on 87 threes his junior year of high school. And so, I mean, and there are times he's made his free throws, mostly in the 70% range over those same 3 years. And I think that his jumper needs a ton of work.
Yeah, I actually didn't think it was that bad. I
Wow.
actually think it's like in terms of he shoots kind of more of a set shot. He doesn't get off the ground a ton. Is he someone that I predict you're gonna want like taking mid rangers off the dribble or something? I would say signs probably point to no on that. But like it didn't like he shot 73% from the line. I think his form looked okay. I thought it actually looked improved from where he was at the Hoop Summit, where it didn't look great, but I've never thought like it looked totally broken to me. Like I don't think he's gonna be a non-shooter. I think he was like aggressive enough taking the ones that were there. So yeah, I just like, I realize the stats are what they are. If you throw in the exhibition, Scandrick was talking about this against Perth, he hit shots a little bit better in that those couple of games. That raises things up. He missed, by the way, the last, I don't know, like 15 games or so of the year with this thumb issue.
Right.
Which, and also like Ignite was awful. Like they actually had gotten probably more like top recruits than they ever had, but the coaching wasn't great. They had 0 point guard play. I mean, he was basically like their biggest initiator. He had a 30% usage, which, you never would have thought that he would be that type of player at the lower levels. He clearly was not ready for that. But like, if you compare him to Castle, who we'll talk about tomorrow, I think his shot looks way better than Castle's. And like, I think like the form looks okay. Like, I don't know. I'm just like it didn't look totally busted to me.
I'm significantly more concerned than you are, and that's fine.
I went on too long. Let's hear your perspective.
I think the thing I noticed was at times it looks like he shoots on the way up, which was a concern. Like, and it just, there isn't enough consistency in Holland's form for me. Like, I thought that, and he had like, Ron Holland had full on air balls on clean looks. Like, this isn't even like, oh, he missed more than he did, but they were like bouncing close off the rim. Like, these were bad misses to me. And the free throw line stuff, as you mentioned, 73 isn't ghastly, and he was, in that he actually shot better than that as senior in high school. But I don't see it. I think that I think that it's going to take some real work. And I mean, you brought up the pull-up stuff.
I agree with you on that. I'm just like, if I was gonna predict, how is he going to compare to like, Isaac Okoro as a shooter? Like, I think he would be better than him, for example. I mean, I realize that's a low bar, obviously, but I'm trying to kind of bracket.
Yeah, I mean, Isaac Okoro is a player whose career has been limited by how bad his shot has been. So, like, I think that's a consideration. And so, for the other part of it, you brought up how Holland had the ball in his hands more, and so he overall. And I can't remember if the synergy splits that I have where it goes in terms of with the filter. I think I did all competitions. Holland, he was 2 of 14 on pull-up threes, and one of the two, I happened to watch that game. It was counted as a pull-up three because he dribbled, but it was 100% a set shot. So he basically made one pull-up three all year, and he was 6 of 17 on pull-up twos. And so, like, he just, I don't think you want him to shoot pull-up twos or anything like that. But to me, there isn't enough of a basis. And just watching a ton of the film on him, I'm more skeptical. And we can have reasonable minds get differ on it. And Holland, like, I wouldn't be surprised if it's something that he works hard on. But another big concern, this has come up a lot over the years.
So are you going to transition from the jumper?
No, I'm not.
Okay, go ahead.
The jump shot has been a problem for Ron Holland. It is like, I remember the first time I heard about him was his junior year of high school. He was already a high-level prospect. I mean, this didn't prevent him from being an elite 5-star guy who was getting major college offers, all that stuff. To me, when a player is that good and has this as a flaw for that long, and it's still not better, and you could argue he is improved. Like it's not like, let's say it's not markedly better. That to me is a sign potentially that there could be something larger, because it's not a circumstance where, like, he had all these other things to do and it was, because players are working on all sorts of stuff. But to me, when you have this as your biggest flaw for multiple years as a high level prospect and it's not really that much better, I worry more than I would if it was in a different circumstance.
Yeah, so just to be exactly clear on where I'm at, I think, if he's not an on-ball player, like, I think it's, probably it might end up somewhere along the lines of like where RJ Barrett is. Like, that's probably where I think he could end up. Barrett would shoot a little bit more from mid-range at this stage, a little more from floater range. Like, not entirely similar players, although I do think they have some similarities in their games. But that's kind of where I would be headed. Like, make some open ones, not like a plus as a shooter, although I'm not going to like totally rule that out at this point in time. Because like I said, I just don't think his form is like that fucked up necessarily. That's a very subjective measurement. I realize that, but Yeah, in comparison to someone like Castle, I'm just more of a believer that like it could be okay. Like I've certainly acknowledged that it may just never develop, and that's a problem. Like that's just the nature of this draft class.
Yeah, and there's a
Yeah,
another weird parallel between those guys is Ron Holland is one of the only guys who played with arguably worse spacing than RJ Barrett did his last year before he went in the draft. But because this G League team was massively messed up. But that's it's an unfortunate confluence that those two guys had. And hopefully Holland will have better spacing on his first NBA team than RJ Barrett did.
All right. What else stood out for him for you?
Oh, I mean, he is a wonderful defensive playmaker. That is to me the quintessential part of the Ron Holland experience. I don't love him as much as I think some do as a like kind of the positional on ball defender. Like he definitely has the chops to eventually do it. He has sufficient athleticism. His feet aren't perfect to me, but he has really active hands, gets not only steals and blocks, but deflections. And like there were a number of plays, including a game against the Stockton Kings, which was also one of his best offensive performances, where it's just like he's just a menace out there and can, even though he's, more of like a 2-3, that he can make plays all over the floor. And it is a really useful thing to have. And like you can forcing turnovers has been a big part of successful, not every successful defense, but many successful defenses over the years. I firmly believe that Ron Holland will be able to translate that from high school to the G League Ignite to the NBA.
Yeah, I think so. And I agree with you that I don't know how unbelievable he was as an on-ball guy getting over screens, or as necessarily even an isolation guy, just like straight up stoning people. Didn't love his closeouts necessarily. Now, it's worth remembering that this team was awful. Like a guy who's this level, maybe you could point to like even someone like Anthony Edwards or Markelle Fultz. Like his team wasn't just like out of games and down by 20 every game. I mean, half the clips I looked at, they're down by 20 or more. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. And like, given that, I think his effort level was actually pretty damn good. And also seeing him in person at the Hoot Summer, I thought was pretty good. And just the way he runs. I mean, there's some of the plays that he would make where, he would be standing on the baseline, his team would turn it over up top, and he'd be like the only one to sprint back and even like kind of get into the play a little bit. He committed a foul on one of them, but it was just like, wow, this guy, like, he really has a motor, and that's impressive considering his age as well and what the circumstance was. So I think he's a guy who's going to play hard on both ends, and I do.
Well,
think,
and I can,
yeah,
I can give an example of a play of that. One of my favorite
sure.
Ron Hollands of all of it was he contested a shot, ran out, got the hit ahead pass, and then whipped it to a breaking teammate for a dunk. And it's like that is a lot of really good things in one. Contesting the shot, showing that hustle, but also making the unselfish play rather than making the selfish play, even if he's on a team that is a disaster.
Yeah, so I don't know how much like, secondary rim protection he's going to give you necessarily, but I do think he can like make rotations quickly. I think he could be kind of like a closeout monster in time just with how fast he is in a straight line as well. I think he's pretty decent decelerating. So yeah, I mean, not again, I predict he will be an all league defender on the perimeter. I would probably not go there because I don't know if he's just like that great of an isolation defender. I think he's got very good tools, but doesn't have like unbelievable length necessarily. Still pretty good, but not an unbelievable standing reach for that position. The next thing I want to talk about is ball handling. I think that's something that made a lot of steps forward this year with just the amount of plays that he had to create. Looking at some of the isolation film, he was 16 out of 40. Obviously, all the times he took jumpers were terrible.
Yes, they were.
On those, but it's pretty amazing how often he was able to get to the basket. And pick and roll, too, a lot of it was just ghost screen, attack out of the ghost screen, like not necessarily coming off the pick, slamming his man into the pick, snaking the pick and roll. It's not necessarily that type of stuff. It's more just like quick push crosses, rejection of the screen, one quick move, or maybe he would make a catch and like jab step right, go left, relatively quick decision, but once he gets moving in a straight line, it's really hard to stay in front of him. And I was just impressed by how often he's able to get to the basket, even though, the teams weren't respecting his jump shot that much. Yeah, I think like his footwork is pretty good. He showed some little instances of like pump fakes and step throughs in the lane at times. But I actually think with the ball handling that he showed and just how much of that he had to do, I thought his passing was, he turned it over obviously a ton. That's just what someone of his profile is going to do with a 30% usage in the G League. He had more turnovers than assists. But I thought some of the assists were pretty good, throwing passes to the weak side, one-handed passes. Like there's some nascent stuff, particularly for a guy who played this whole season at 18. I actually think there is a little bit of like point forwardy potential, not necessarily to the level of maybe like a Dyson Daniels, who's like a natural point guard at that size, coming out of Ignite. Although I think Holland compared to him is just much better at getting to the basket and finishing, just a way more dynamic player overall with the ball. But I do think that you could utilize him some more on the ball maybe, or bringing the ball up if you have kind of more of an off ball guard. So I think that's a area in which he showed some potential to me. And I was impressed by relative to where he was at the hoop zone. It was a guy who really could be a guy who could initiate some offense for you.
While I am impressed with what Holland put together in a very challenging situation, like he should not have had the role within the G League Ignites offense that he did, and to do as well as he did, I give him full credit in the effort and all that stuff the stuff that you saw in terms of motor and all that. I agree with all of that. I personally didn't see a lot in that film that I thought applied to him generating competitive advantages in the NBA. I thought that he did a good job in the circumstance. And, I thought one thing that was really underutilized with Holland, in part because of the spacing, was his, having value as a cutter and all that type of stuff. But as a practical consideration, if you aren't a believer in his jump shot, which I am not, it is extremely hard to be a positive player offensively as a perimeter guy who doesn't have enough juice with the ball in his hands. And so I think sure you can in opportunistically on a handoff or on a cut or something else like that, he could do a small screen. I think there are things that Holland can do positively, but I am much less enthusiastic than you are that he can do things on ball. And you mentioned that teams weren't respecting his jump shot. I think they should have respected a hell of a lot less. And that would have made things even harder. It's not like the pull up was a threat or anything like that. And he's a solid finisher. We already talked about that. And so you don't have to be petrified that like, if he gets all the way to the rim, he's going to dunk all over us Jalen Green style or anything like that. So I think that if my theory of his jump shot is correct, it short circuits his game even more thoroughly. And that becomes a problem. But just as a practical consideration, and this is going to telegraph a little bit of what we talk about with Stephon Castle, I personally believe that it is exceedingly hard for a limited shooter, and I'm talking limited shooter, I'm not even talking about straight up awful, to be a useful and sometimes even a viable offensive player. And I invoke this guy as a physical comparison. Ron Holland is a meaningfully better offensive player at this point than Andre Robertson was. I don't know that the difference between them actually matters that much when you think about how the league has changed over the last 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, so that's obviously a big disagreement that we have. I mean, so this is what I kind of view as like his most likely outcome. Pretty high level defensive player, guy you can really grab and go, like really helps your transition game a ton. Can drive closeouts effectively. Robertson could not do that at all. So part of that is because he didn't get a closeout, but also Ron Holland, if you are not in front of him, he will just drive into the lane anyway and get some acceleration and could probably finish or draw help and kick out as well. I think his dribbling is pretty solid. They actually even ran like a few post ups for him too, which I liked a lot. Actually, what it looked like with him in the post against smaller players, they would like set a cross screen for him with a smaller guy, and he would actually he showed a lot of aggressiveness. I thought that was part of why I thought he showed some pretty decent strength in those matchups. But so I think there is like a little bit of a possibility of him taking a Jaylen Brown type of leap as a creator. Probably more likely he's a guy who can push it in transition, attack some closeouts. Maybe you try to like run some plays where you get him downhill, or as like the handler with some ghost screening or something like that. Where it's, it's just kind of harder to go under. You set the screen flat behind the guy. You might have to switch on to the shooter or something, so you can't just like back way off of him or something. Uh, and then I think he will make open shots well enough. That again, I acknowledge that he may not, and I acknowledge that you think he just won't.
I don't expect him to. I'm
Yeah,
not foreclosing on it. It's just I don't see that as a probable outcome.
yeah. He just does, like, he's a pretty young guy, like shot it well enough from the line. He just doesn't look like a non-shooter to me, just watching him and watching his release in the way that like a Castle does. And I think so that's like a pretty valuable player with some possible higher end outcomes as the score. I mean, as much as you might think that this G League team sucked, like he still had 30% usage on 56% true shooting. It's a little below the league average as like the only creator on his team. Like he was able to get to the basket and like make things happen offensively. And
But like we've seen that is like the least, that is less translatable from the G League than other things are. So it's like I'm not gonna be like, oh well, he did really well in this thing that we've seen.
Who are your examples of that?
Scoot. I mean, Scoot was it was something that we've talked about a lot of.
I think Scoot's still gonna be pretty good.
Oh, he is going to be pretty good, but we were really over the moon. Oh, there was one other guy, like Jalen Green was another one, like, and his finishing hasn't been as good as we wanted it to be. It's just something.
I mean, we got a long way. I think I'll probably still be liking him 2 years from now, and you'll probably not be, and it's gonna have to be something where 4 or 5 years from now we'll find out. I mean, that's really kind of what it is.
And the other
comparing him to like Daniels, for example, right? Like Dyson Daniels, different team composition, but he just wasn't able to create enough shots. He just like he'd drive it in the lane and it would just kind of be like a floater or whatever. Like Ron Holland is like a very aggressive driver and he's very athletic, like more so than someone like a Barrett. And like he's able to get there and like make plays at the basket. I think his passing is like pretty decent. Like I think he puts pressure on the defense with his ball handling and his aggressiveness and pretty good athleticism.
It's an enjoyable disagreement, and I think the other point, I don't want to belabor any of these, is that I don't think Holland's like the overall offensive game, like generally speaking, the more limited you are, unless you're incredible on the other end or something else, the less likely it is that a team is going to go deep into their bag of tricks to maximize you. And so you brought up Isaac Okoro, and so like Holland, and that's why he could end up being such a fun tipping point guy, is because the threshold between where I am on him and where you are on him, they aren't actually that far apart, but they make a world of difference in terms of how your team incorporates you. Because if he can do more than Okoro can in these circumstances, well, then he'll have a larger role, and it's feedback loops in a different way than we talk about in the context of like a defensive stop and an offensive backstop, where it all fits together, where it'll kind of spiral one direction or the other. And I'm unsure, but I lean more towards being skeptical, and you are leaning more optimistic, both of which are reasonable outcomes. But I feel like it's going to go one or the other.
Yeah, and I would say, obviously, the shooting is the shooting. I mean, if people could reliably project shooters perfectly, this wouldn't be this business, right? You would be the greatest draft evaluator of all time. We're not that. You only just do the best you can and hope that you're at least in getting the range correctly. To me, my biggest concern is maybe he just ends up being a little too small. Just like and Okoro, I think, was kind of like this too. But to me, Okoro nowhere near the ball skills that Ron Holland has, and I think his shot's a lot more broken too. But like Okoro really is like not quite a 3, and he really ended up being more of kind of like a 1-2 defender. Yeah, he could guard threes. Okay, he guarded Paolo Banchero, all right, but he still just wasn't. He just looked a little small out there. Now, part of the problem was he also just couldn't really finish, the way I think Holland can. But so maybe he's just a little too light, just not quite big enough. That might be a concern, and kind of the same way as RJ Barrett is too, right? Where RJ Barrett, it'd be great if he were just a 3 size, but he's more of like a big 2 size, and that but he has kind of more the skill of a three, the shooting of a three, and that's always kind of made him a little bit difficult of a fit. But I mean, given this draft, like if Ron Holland turned into RJ Barrett, like that would maybe he should go number 3. So, like, so but I think that's all I've got on him, I would say.
One other thing I'll notice that one thing I mentioned briefly, it's a small nitpicky thing on Holland, but he'll clean this up, is I call these the Mikal Petrus turnovers. A lot of his spot up turnovers are he tries to set up for the drive and just steps back on the line. Guys have trouble with that into their 20s and 30s, so it's not a big deal, but it is not, I just cracked up at how many times I saw that in his spot up film. It's like just something that happens.
Yeah, Nick says his jumper is terrifying to me. Again, I just like the form just doesn't look that bad. Like it looks relatively smooth. There isn't like some big huge hitch in it. Caden asks, who's the ideal team for him to fall to? What do you think of that? Pistons just got Fred Vincent, Danny.
Oh man. I mean, I did briefly think about if Chip's still with OKC, right?
Yes.
So if they took him at 12,
I don't think they can get him at 12.
Oh, I think
they could maybe move up to get him.
If only they had resources.
Yeah. Memphis would be kind of interesting. I don't know that Memphis has succeeded in like getting guys to shoot, but like, a team that does a lot of transition, I think would be
Indiana. They have a lot of guards. They have a lot of guards.
Well, I mean, they don't have a pick though.
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, as far as like, we're talking like kind of mid-late lottery. If we're talking about falling, I mean, San Antonio, he would be a pretty solid fit there too, right? He's definitely gonna be third on my board. I'm gonna try to decide whether I'm gonna have him in the same group as Sarr and Shepard.
He will not be third on my board.
I gathered that. So yeah, I wouldn't love it in Portland necessarily. Houston, I mean, I think they would, like, if my top 2 guys are gone, I'd say take them, but obviously there are a ton of other wings there. Detroit still too. I mean, with Cade, Asar, not a great fit with Asar, obviously, but the Fred Vincent thing is nice. Charlotte, his transition stuff, I think would work pretty well there. I would like him, and maybe that would mean the departure of Miles Bridges too, but I think he's actually a pretty decent fit with LaMelo,
sure,
and with Brandon Miller, because both those guys shoot it pretty well, and he can really just add to their transition element. Like I think this guy is like a really terrifying player for the defense to deal with in transition. All right, that's probably good. That's a good disagreement here for us. Always interesting to see. It just it's too bad that the shooting's the biggest thing we're disagreeing on, and we're not going to find out on that for a long time. All right, that will do it for today. Again, reminder to those of you all listening on the public pod, please consider subscribing to Dunked On Prime, because that mock off season 2024 code will get you 25% off. And mock off season still very relevant. Pod with Jake Fisher, very relevant. John and I recorded. The pod with Keandre is really good. Obviously, we'll wrap up the entire draft. We're going to wrap up every signing and free agency, every roster player in Summer League. We got so much great stuff coming. I hope you'll be a part of it on Dunked On Prime. Talk to y'all next time.